قد أفلح المؤمنون الذين هم في صلاتهم خاشعون والذين هم عن اللغو معرضون والذين هم للزكاة فاعلون والذين هم لفروجهم حافظون إلا على أزواجهم أو ما ملكت أيمانهم فإنهم غير ملومين فمن ابتغى وراء ذلك فأولئك هم العادون والذين هم لأماناتهم وعهدهم راعون والذين هم على صلواتهم يحافظون أولئك هم الوارثون الذين يرثون الفردوس هم فيها خالدون ولقد خلقنا الإنسان من سلالة من طين ثم جعلناه نطفة في قرار مكين ثم خلقنا النطفة علقة فخلقنا العلقة مضغة فخلقنا المضغة عظاما فكسونا العظام لحما ثم أنشأناه خلقا آخر فتبارك الله أحسن الخالقين صدق الله العلي العظيم. طيب وأفواهكم بذكر محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه وخاتم رسله النبي المؤيد والرسول الأمجد أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المظلومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل الساعة وليا محافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا، وجعلنا من خير أعوانه وأنصاره والمستشهدين بين يديه ببركة الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Given the choice of clothing by some of the brothers, I feel that some have. Today is a day, in terms of the calendar, close to that as well, without mentioning what the event is. But I thought of speaking about Imam Hassan al-Askari alayhi salam, whose martyrdom, the commemoration for his martyrdom, is this week. Either it's reported to be tomorrow, the 2nd of Rabi'ul Awwal, or the day after tomorrow, depending on when the date falls, or the more popular opinion is that it was on the 8th of Rabi'ul Awwal. Given that I might not be able to lecture here this year anymore, before I have to go back to Qom inshallah, I thought I'll do an honorable lecture in the name of Imam Hassan al-Askari, because it is an Imam that we do not always have all the knowledge that we need to have, the basic understanding of who this Imam is. So inshallah, this majlis of ours is a majlis of remembering Imam Sayyidat Fatimah al-Zahra salamullahi alayha, by commemorating and increasing our knowledge about Imam Hassan al-Askari, one of the most important of her offspring, the father of the Imam of our time. So for that to happen, please honor yourself and honor the Imam with a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. As you know, Imam Hadi, the father of Imam Hassan al-Askari, was forcefully relocated to the city of Samirra, or what was initially called Surra Man Ra'a, which literally means he becomes happy whoever sees this town. It was a small town, but a beautiful town, and it became the center of government for the Abbasids. And it was a government town, a military town as well. Predominantly, the inhabitants and the residents of this town were the important men of government, the Khalifa himself, his advisors, men of military, commanders. These kinds of individuals were present in this town. You had ordinary citizens also residing in this town of Surra Man Ra'a or Samirra, as it later became. When they continuously said Surra Man Ra'a, it became Samirra. Ordinary citizens also lived in this town, but primarily it was a bit like Canberra. You know how if you go to Canberra, 50% of the people probably have a job within the government. Now, Canberra is a very big city. Samarra in those days and ages would have been much smaller, but nonetheless, that was the nature of this city. The Abbasid rulers moved Imam al-Hadi, the father of Imam Hassan al-Askari, to this town, and he resided there about 20 years. We're talking about the father of Imam Hassan al-Askari. It's a very long time. And because of the residence of Imam Hassan al-Askari and his father in this town, a lot more people gravitated towards coming here, because they were notable figures, at least for the lovers of the Ahlul Bayt and the Shia. This was their Imam. So they would come to this town. And naturally, the population would then be a mix of these, like I said, influential figures, normal citizens, and lovers of the Ahlul Bayt who had moved there. Now, it's worth addressing why they were relocated there to begin with. You see, during the time of, this started with the Umayyad government as well, late into the Umayyad government, and continued more strongly into the Abbasid rulers. You had two factions of the Shia who resided and lived in that time, and you still have that, by the way. You had those who we now identify primarily as Zaydis, and these were groups of the Shia that always created uprisings. The most popular and the first of these uprisings would be the uprising of Zayd ibn Ali, the son of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam. And they identify as Zaydis because they consider him to be an Imam. Similarly, descendants of Zayd, and in particular members of the Ahlul Bayt from the Hassani line. So our Imams are from, in terms paternally speaking, are from the Husayni line, correct? Members of the Ahlul Bayt, elite members of the Ahlul Bayt, primarily from the Hassani line, would become leaders of this Zaydi, more military orientated, political Shia group. Like I said, for them, an Imam was someone who was able to create an uprising. If you are a quiet Imam, if you're a silent Imam, that wasn't good enough. It was in their belief, those Shia, and it's still their belief today, that Imam must create an uprising. So they always, during the Abbasid governments, they always created problem for the Abbasids, because uprising every day, a small group here, a small group there, the Alawis, if you like. The Abbasid rulers thought that the second Shia group, which was led by the Imams, was also of a similar thinking, that they all also wanted to create a military uprising. Of course, the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt, they were against these Khulafa, they were against these caliphs and their systems and their ways of rulership, but they did not always see it fit to create a military uprising. The only Imams we know who did this was, of course, Imam Ali, when it wasn't really an uprising, he was the Khalifa. Imam Hassan was also the Khalifa. The only Imam from this Husayni line, from this Shia ideology, the Twelver ideology that now we call, that created an uprising was none other than Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam. All the other Imams, they chose other ways of dealing with these governments, of managing them in a way to extend their goals, to advance their goals, and to ensure the safety and the welfare and the growth of their followers. But at the same time, they did not see it as a right political decision to go into direct conflict with these rulers. But the Abbasid rulers, for two reasons. One reason, they thought that the Imams could also create an uprising. They thought they were like these Zaydi groups, these other Alawi groups, these other Shia groups that were always creating uprisings left, right, and center and creating problems for the Abbasids. So they always had this fear, the threat of Imam Hassan al-Askari, his father, and even previous Imams of creating an uprising. Even Imam al-Rida alayhi salam. He's relocated to Marw, where Ma'mun was governing, because of this exact fee. The second fee they had from these members of the Ahlul Bayt, these Imams, is that they had a lot of influence. They had built a strong network of their followers across the Muslim lands, which inshallah I will explain a bit more later on. So they had influence, they had numbers, and they thought that these Imams might in fact create an uprising. So the best thing to do is to bring them closer. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. So that was the idea. They migrated forcefully Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam to Samarra, and he stayed there, like I said, for about 20 years during the term of his imamah. And thereafter, it became time for Imam Hassan al-Askari to take the leadership. Now, in terms of how the leadership passed down to Imam al-Hassan al-Askari, we have many written in books of history, in Shia books of history, and also in general books of history, how Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam delegated the next Imam. Okay, so we didn't have much of a problem in the nomination of Imam Hassan al-Askari to become the 11th Imam. But we did have problems sometimes. Why am I mentioning this? For example, after the demise of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, we have a problem. Not everyone is following Imam al-Sadiq. Or after the demise of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam, not everyone is following Imam al-Kadhim. You have other different Shia groups forming. But after the time of Imam al-Hadi, the 10th Imam, there isn't much of a problem in following Imam al-Hassan al-Askari, except two groups who followed his brothers for a short period of time, Ja'far and Muhammad. But that was, they were short-lived and they were dealt with. Primarily, there was a swift transition from Imam al-Hadi to Imam Hassan al-Askari. And I think this is important for you to know, that moving from one Imam to another in those ages was not always easy with every Imam. Okay? Even Imam al-Rida alayhi salam experienced problems. People did not accept his leadership. There were always conflicts. But as far as this beautiful Imam is concerned, we did not have this conflict. So the Imam is moved to Samarra and they need to monitor him. Whether the Imam was living under complete detainment or he had a lot of freedom, we don't exactly know. But he was restricted nonetheless. There are ways to know this. When you look at the reports from Imam Hassan al-Askari and the people that have, the narrators that have given us the reports from Imam Hassan and they have seen him in person, besides the ones that were very, very close to him, a large majority of them would narrate like this: I saw the Imam on the street. I saw the Imam as he was traveling to a different city with the Khalifa. I saw the Imam while he was going to the court of the Khalifa. So it shows you don't have many accounts where they say, oh, I saw the Imam in his house. So it seems there's a restriction in seeing the Imam in his house, and for people to be able to see him, it was predominantly on the street. When he was going to visit the Khalifa had appointed Monday and Thursday for the Imam to visit him, to make an appearance in court. Okay? The pretext to this was that, oh, we're respecting the Imam. He should come. We want him to be present with us. You're going to see the Khalifa, the number one guy in town. That was the pretext. But the real reason was for the Imam to be present so they could see what the Imam is doing. If he's communicating with his large number of followers across the Muslim lands. While he was making these visits, on the streets, some of his followers would see him. They would speak to him, they would say salam to him. But at a point in time, it became so difficult for the Imam. We can't say this was during his entire 6 years of Imamah. As you know, he only was an Imam for 6 years. And he was martyred at the age of 28. So during these 6 years, there is sometimes very strict, sometimes giving him more freedom. One of those instances where it becomes very strict and difficult to see the Imam, even on the street, he writes a letter to his Shia that when you see me on the streets, do not say salam to me. Tell my followers when they see me on the streets, do not say salam to me. Do not point to me and say, this is the Imam. Why? The Imam writes in that letter that I fear for your lives. It is not safe for you. Because by association, the rulers of the time would know who the followers of the Ahlul Bayt are. If these individuals are saying hi to the Imam on the street, they would go and persecute them later. They would go and question and interrogate them later. Why are you saying salam to Imam Hassan al-Askari? Who are you? What is your business? And they could put them in prison. Their life could be endangered. But could you imagine for a second seeing the Imam on the street and not being allowed to say hi? How difficult is that? Imagine seeing your father on the street and ignoring your father. This is the Imam. So the times had sometimes become so difficult on the Imam that his followers could not even express their love and their respect for the Imam during seeing him on the streets. let alone visiting him in his house. But like I said, this wasn't something that was happening all across. Sometimes the Imam was even taken into imprisonment. They took the Imam, although they respected him a lot, but in certain cases they took the Imam to prison. What is interesting, when you look at those times when the Imam went to prison, the Khulafa would assign the most severe of guards. There, in one particular account, the Khalifa or whoever was in charge of prison, he says, I assign the two of my most severe, violent, and most fierce, that's probably the more correct word, of men to make sure that Imam Hassan al-Askari does not have a good time. After Imam Hassan al-Askari's stay in prison, you look at the description for the men, these two men. They were so influenced and affected by the state of Imam Hassan al-Askari that they themselves had become men of prayer. They themselves had become men of worship. So this is the effect Imam Hassan al-Askari had on these savage, if you like, individuals, these cruel individuals, by just his mere presence, a 28-year-old or so, by just his mere presence, his worship. They say he was always fasting in prison. He had this effect on them. Nonetheless, this is the kind of environment Imam Hassan al-Askari is living in Samarra. And the Shia have a difficult time reaching the Imam. One of the main ways that the Imam is able to communicate with the Shia is through letters. Given that personal access to the Imam is limited, they are using letters and correspondence to be able to communicate with the Holy Imam. And this is predominantly how the Shia communicated, except certain very, very close companions would come and see the Imam. It is interesting, even with the correspondence, of course, some of these letters would be very secret. They would not want the government to find out what the content of these letters are. So sometimes they would have to hide in different ways that there was letters being exchanged between the Imam and his followers. There is an individual, as you should know, Uthman ibn Sa'id, who is the first representative, special representative of the Imam of our time. You know how the Imam had 4 special representatives? This was the first special representative, Uthman ibn Sa'id. He was also a companion to the 2 previous Imams. His job, he was in the trade of selling oil. To conceal the letters and make sure the government does not find out, he would hide the letters. He would hide sometimes money that was designated for the Imam from his followers inside cans of oil. He would take these cans of oil to the Imam. The soldiers would think, the spies would think, okay, he's bringing oil and he's taking oil back. This is his job. Maybe he's here for a visitation. You know, he's got his gi on him, if you like. And then he would open these cans and there won't be oil in them, there will be letters. And he would allow these letters to be reached to the Imam. From the time of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam, the Shia slowly started to feel more pressure. Only during the time of Imam al-Baqir and Imam al-Sadiq, they have some relative freedom. Imam is in Medina, he's able to sometimes go to Kufa. They would come to see the Imam, they would receive narrations from Imam al-Sadiq. But when you come to the time of Imam al-Kadhim, their difficulty increases. The governments are difficult and putting pressure on the Imams and also on the Shia. Like I said, there were these groups of Shia, some of them were creating military uprisings. So automatically, there were sensitive individuals. And even if you were not part of those Shia groups that were creating these military uprisings, because you were Alawi, you followed and you loved the Ahlul Bayt, you would quickly be identified as someone who was a threat to the government. How did the Shia respond to this? From the time of Imam al-Kadhim, they started to migrate away from these major cities. So instead of, for example, living in Medina, instead of living in Mecca, instead of living in Baghdad, they started to migrate further out, in lands and areas where these governments had less influence, where the tribes in these places were more welcoming to the Ahlul Bayt. And they predominantly moved to the east of Iran. To the east of, to these further, Old Persia we're talking about, okay? Which is now around the city of Mashhad. When we talk about east of Iran, in the vicinity of Mashhad. Cities like Samarkand, which hopefully you've heard of the name of, I think that is even more west than Afghanistan right now. Samarkand, Bayhaq, Kash, Ray, which is modern day Tehran. Qom was always a popular city with the Shia. Ahwaz in Iran right now. Nayshabur, a very close city to Mashhad right now, was one of the strongest cities for the Shia. So they started moving out to these cities. They have more freedom there. They can live their lives with more safety, and they are not a threat to the government anymore. But there is a problem here. If the Imam is in Medina, okay, or the Imam in the case of Imam al-Rida is in Maru, is in one city, wherever the Imam may be, how is he going to communicate with his Shia that are now spread around geographically so far and apart? It makes it very difficult even for them to visit the Imam. If the Imam is in Medina and you're in Iraq, it's relatively easier for you to come. But when you're going out very, very far, even visiting the Imam by foot will become more difficult. And on the other side, as we said, the pressure on the Imams was increasing. So it wasn't easy to see the Imam to begin with. Here, this is where we see the Imams devising a plan to control, organize, and manage their Shia and be able to communicate with them while they are so far apart. They begin to create what we call the Wikala network, the proxy network, where the Imams, alayhimus salam, peace be upon them, would allocate a proxy, an agent, a representative for each city. This person would receive letters from the Imam, would receive instructions from the Imam, and he would relay that to his people. So no longer those individuals have to in person come to see the Imam. Correspondence would happen between them, letter exchanges would happen between them, and the Imam would be able to guide them. Not only that, it was more advanced than that. They were able to move funds from these very, very distant cities to the Imam. They would give their khums to these representatives. Then these representatives would transfer this somehow through the routes they had back to the Imam. Or it would be left with one of the companions and the Imam would send him a letter on what to do with the money. When we come to the time of Imam Hassan al-Askari and the Shia are now in different parts of the Muslim lands, Samarkand is very far from Samarra, especially in those times. But the Imam is monitoring and controlling all of his Shia through this Wikala network, through this proxy network is created. And it has become so advanced, now there's a hierarchy. One proxy, one representative would, for example, receive funds and then pass it on to someone senior who would then go and give it to someone even more senior who would then give it to the Imam. Do you see the level of secrecy? How much they are being careful not to put the Imam in danger. But at the same time, the Imam is guiding the Shia. There are many reasons why the Imam would do this. One was to guide them religiously. As you know, a lot of fitna, a lot of falsehood was rising within the ranks of the Shia as well. These different ideological groups who claim themselves to be lovers of the Ahlul Bayt would sometimes, independently of the Ahlul Bayt and the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt, say things that was not confirmed by them. They would create sects. They would create new groups. For the Imam to safeguard the Shia from them, he would write a letter down. Say, this person is not to be trusted. This person is not from us. Dismiss him. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. ثانيا على حب فاطمة. This Wakala network that the previous Imams started, and now they have this strong network of proxies all around the world, all around the Muslim lands, had another goal as well. In particular, when we come to the time of Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam, the 9th Imam onwards. The policy has now become for the Imams to prepare the Shia for the occultation. If you look at like I said, Imam al-Baqir and Imam al-Sadiq, you have a good access to the Imam. Imam al-Rida, although he's relocated to Maru and he's under government supervision for a year, but still people could see him. But as you come, the supervision and the surveillance increases. Okay? So this Wakala network is introduced, and the people have to use this correspondence network, this system of letters, to speak to the Imam. With the earlier Imams, or the middle Imams if you like, there's an opportunity to see the Imam. With the later Imams, you are primarily interacting with your Imam through the representative. You're not necessarily seeing the Imam. You are seeing what the representative is saying, what letter the representative has received. You are already getting used to this idea of not being able to interact with the Imam as you would like, in person, physically. In the time of Imam Hassan al-Askari and his father, it's even increased further. The surveillance is even more. So people are slowly getting used to this idea of, okay, if I want to ask a question from the Imam, it's very difficult to go see him in Samarra. And even if I went, it's not for sure if I could ask my question. If I would be allowed on the street to interact with the Imam, I'm going to use this system. Then the minor occultation comes and something else is taken away. We still have the representatives, but now there isn't even an opportunity to see the Imam directly. Only 4 people can see the Imam. And all the other followers of the Imam have to interact through them. There's an added layer of difficulty. Previously, at least maybe you went to Samarra and you saw Imam Hassan al-Askari. But in the minor occultation, with the beginning of the Imamah of the 12th Imam, another layer is added. You can see the Imams are gradually preparing the Shia for what is to come, the major occultation. Because the major occultation is the next step. Now, not only the general masses are not to interact with the Imam and see him personally, not only you can interact through the 4 representatives and get your letters passed down through them, no one can see the Imam. You see, imagine that happened all of a sudden. That would be a huge shock. It would be something that the Shia society would not be prepared for, correct? But the Imams, from the time of Imam al-Kadhim, and in particular after the time of Imam al-Jawad, are preparing the Shia for slowly creating this distance, which was essentially forced on them, but using this forced separation to prepare the Shia for the occultation. And this teaches you the foresight that the Imams had. They are thinking about generations to come. They are thinking about hundreds of years of later to come. Imam al-Jawad is thinking about the Shia during the minor and the major occultation. This is how they did their job. Look at how much restrictions they have and look at how much planning they do for the future. There is so much lesson in that for us, even in our personal lives, that despite the restrictions I have, I can plan for years ahead, as long as I'm able to have a good plan and follow it. And you know what? Probably the tragedy of Imam Hassan al-Askari is an increased tragedy when you look at it through this lens. Yes, we've lost another Imam, but there is an increased element of sadness to it. Why? Because after this Imam, we enter the period of occultation. A period of further distance from the Imams. A period of sadness, if you like, of not being able to access the Imams in the way we like. How nice would it be for us to write letters to the Imam of our time? Imagine that. Instead of going on your marja's website, you're able to write a letter and you get a response back. But with the minor occultation, we lose access to that as well. And as the narrations say, it's going to be a long period of difficulty for the Shia. A long period of distance from the most central figure that they take their religion from. So in a way, the martyrdom of Imam Hassan al-Askari is a double tragedy. A tragedy because we lost the Imam, and a tragedy that we entered this period of ghaiba, occultation, further distance from these beautiful figures. And I think for the 11th Imam himself, this was an increased tragedy. I think his heart was torn for the Shia, knowing that he has to prepare them for something this difficult, knowing that they are going to go into a period where they will be severely tested. I think Imam Hassan al-Askari, in his last days, most likely, given the gems of human beings they are and how much they love us, I think his heart was torn for us, knowing of what's to come, knowing of the difficulties we will face. Now, this Wikala network was not without problems, unfortunately. Sometimes these proxies and representatives would not do their responsibilities and duties properly, especially those representatives that were responsible for collecting money and passing this money to the imam. You know, money is always good, isn't it? And you have now large sums of money. Lovers of the Ahlul Bayt want to give this to the imam. You see this big sum of money in front of you, and you start thinking about all the things you could do, about the house you could buy, he was probably thinking about horses, or about the women who could marry if he has extra, about the fame he would have, so on and so forth. Some of these representatives would sometimes betray their loyalty to the imam. Instead of passing on the letters and passing on the money through the line, through the chain back to the imam, they would hold it on to themselves. Can you imagine that? The imam has specifically appointed you to collect money, to carry out and do things for him, and because of money you betray the imam. That's a sad fate to have. That's a very, very tragic fate to have. When things like this would happen, the imam would quickly write to that town, to that city, to that land, and dismiss the representative. But perhaps the most heartbreaking of these betrayals is an individual during the time of Imam Hassan al-Askari by the name of Ahmad ibn Hilal. Ahmad ibn Hilal was not just a normal representative. He was a scholar. He had experienced the previous imams. He had been a long companion to Imam al-Hadi. And Imam al-Hadi had a much longer imamah than Imam Hassan al-Askari. He was a learnt man. He was a trusted man. The Shia really respected him. Imagine a grand scholar right now today. How do you look at these people? Ahmad ibn Hilal begins to disobey Imam Hassan al-Askari alayhi salam. So the Imam writes a letter to the communities that were following him that stay away from this individual. Do you know what the Shia do? The Shia cannot believe this. They're in a state of shock. How is it that Ahmad ibn Hilal is being dismissed by Imam Hassan? What's going on? They can't believe it. So they ask the Imam to send a second letter, a confirmation, because of how surprised they were about this dismissal. So the Imam sends a second letter that this man is no longer to be trusted. You know, there is a lesson for both the scholar and the non-scholar in this story. For the scholar, regardless of your knowledge, how far you reach in your expertise, in the years of hawza you have, in how many followers you have, you may become the biggest marja' taqleed. Ahmad ibn Hilal was effectively, somewhat like that in his people. Yes, he was relaying the instructions of the Imam, but he was respected. It's a lesson for the scholar that regardless of the level of ilm you have, the following you have, companionship, scholars today, even grand scholars today, they're not companions to the Imam, are they? No one sees the Imam. But Ahmad ibn Hilal was a companion who used to see the Imams, sit with them, learn directly from them. But he came to a point where he deviated from the path. There is no immunity. And this could apply similarly as it applies to grand scholars, it also applies to your local scholars. Before talking about that, the lesson, I think, regardless of which scholar we're talking about, the lesson this event has for us is that as the Shia, as people as lovers of the Ahlul Bayt, we should be ready sometimes. We never wish for these kinds of things to happen, of course. We should be ready sometimes, maybe, for a grand scholar to fall off the path. It could happen. If it happens to a senior companion like Ahmad, it could happen to someone of the greatest status amongst the Shia. We don't want that, but it could happen. And it could happen more often It could happen more often at the local communities because the local communities don't have the luxury of benefiting from these grand scholars, and these more local scholars, they could fall short of the standards that they were presenting before. And this happens. And this creates a shock. This creates a disheartening for people who used to look up to that individual. But this story teaches us that we do not follow men. We do not follow men just because we like them, just because we think they speak very well, just because they've spent a long time in the hawza, just because they have an association with this family or that. No. We follow men because they represent the Ahlul Bayt. We follow these individuals, brothers or sisters, men or women, whoever these local, scholarly figures are. We follow them because they're supposed to take us to the truth. We follow the truth in essence. And I say this as a warning that tomorrow this could happen. It could happen in Australia. It could happen in a different part of the world. Someone you respected, suddenly they fall short of the standards you were expecting. Are you going to allow this to damage your faith? Are you going to allow this and say to yourself, well, look, if he did this, what hope do I have? If this happened to him, then what hopes for salvation do I have? And allow your relationship with God and religion to be weakened. And it can happen. It can happen. And it has happened. History will repeat itself. But if we are strong, if we are intelligent, we are vigilant, we are awake, we have principles on why we follow people, we do not chase celebrities, we do not create a celebrity culture. When you listen to someone on the minbar, when you listen to someone on the pulpit, you don't go, wow, how glorious is this man? Look at the fame and look at the glamour. I wish I was like him. I wish I had a following like him. I wish people would listen to me. I wish I could speak like him. If that's the feeling you get, you're following this person for very wrong reasons. If you're getting some high from speaking this person because you want to be in his shoes and you want to experience the same thing he's experiencing because he's getting attention, because he's getting fame, because people now point to him, then if this person falls off the path, you might fall off the path as well. Because you are taking your religion according to the wrong principles, according to the wrong standards. But if you listen to someone because of their knowledge, if you listen to someone because they remind you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not because it looks glamorous, not because it looks nice, not because this person is successful, but no, there is something to be taken as a lesson, as a reminder, and it takes you back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When that person ceases to remind you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when that person ceases, la samahallah, God forbid, to teach you the lessons from the Ahlul Bayt, you're firm like a mountain. Because you have principles to hold back on. You have the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt to fall back on. An individual came to Imam Hassan al-Askari alayhi salam and asked a question which I think is very relevant to all of us. He asked him, what is the difference between a Shia and a lover of the Ahlul Bayt? What is the difference between a Shia and a lover of the Ahlul Bayt? So the Imam replies to him, our Shia are those who follow our teachings, who obey all of our commands and stay away from all our prohibitions. Those of the Shia, or those who claim to be our followers, if they look into their lives and they see that from the obligations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the wajib and the haram, they see that, man, out of 10 of these, 8 of them I am failing, the Imam says, Laysa minna. He is not from us. We proudly say we are the Shia of the Ahlul Bayt, but maybe we should sometimes say we're just lovers of the Ahlul Bayt. Because I give sometimes, in my shortcomings, the Ahlul Bayt a bad name. Shi'at Ahlul Bayt, but does not act according to this prescription and instruction of the Imam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. How long have I been talking? Now, how long have I been talking? Now, how long have I been talking? I'll go to morning, but 45 minutes? Okay. I'll mention two stories inshallah, because stories are nice to end it with, from Imam Hassan al-Askari. Actually, it's been 45 minutes. I'll end with this final point about Imam Hassan al-Askari alayhi salam. As you know, the Imam, as I said, he was a young Imam. He was martyred at the age of 28. And that's a beautiful thing in a way. Not that he died young and he was killed young, but the fact that when he was an Imam, it was between the age of 22 and 28, roughly around that time. For many of us youngsters or young men, in this age, this is a comforting thing. And this means the Imam automatically becomes a role model, not only for the general public, but specifically for the youth. You know, taking lessons from the Imams is not always easy, in the sense that, okay, I am around that age, and now I'm comparing myself to Imam Hassan al-Askari. I could be comparing myself to something really high, and I really am, correct? For example, Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam, the 9th Imam, he became an Imam when he was 8. I cannot expect an 8-year-old to be like Imam al-Jawad. It's not feasible. Most 8-year-olds are on TikTok scrolling, and they are very far from even just being a well-learnt individual, let alone comparing him to Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam. The Imams were gifted, yes, no doubt about that. They had this pure lineage. Allah was spiritually always supporting them, that He had given them this protection. But at the same time, with all of this, we still can take from the Imams in the aspect that whatever they were given plenty. They were given a lot by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But they also worked plenty. With what they were given, they did great. I think on that aspect, if we focus, someone like myself, very close to the age of the Imam when he was a shaheed, it's a beautiful thing. I'm like, okay, he was 28, I'm around that age. What have I done with my life? This man was known by all the Muslims at that time. Even after his lifetime, people in his city and otherwise would remember him in greatness. And I say to myself, well, how far are you? You're around the same age. What are you doing? Of course, I cannot compare myself to Imam Hassan al-Askari, because he's an Imam. He's been gifted. There's a lot of blessings Allah has given him. He had those forefathers, correct? But he also, I know this Imam, with whatever he was given, he worked very hard for it as well. Allah gifted him and he worked hard. And I think that's a lesson we can take from Imam Hassan al-Askari. Given his age, we can relate to him on that dimension. What I have been given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in terms of talents, intellectually speaking, physically speaking, socially speaking, financially speaking, what has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala given me in a land like this, where I'm not like those, unfortunately, some of our brothers and sisters in different parts of the world, where they do not know if they'll wake up tomorrow, whether a bomb by the IDF might wipe out their entire family. You and I live in a part of the world where we have the opportunity to wake up tomorrow and have another day. And we'll be questioned for that. We will be questioned for the youth we had. Imam Khomeini rahmatullahi alayh would often repeat that if you do not do something for yourself when you're young, forget about it. Forget about it. If you cannot build the foundations when you are 17, when you are 15, when you are 20, 25, and let's say even 30, if you cannot build good habits in these ages, there's not much hope for you when you're hitting 40 and 50. The characters become too rigid. These things that you accustom yourself with from a young age, the lack of not reading, the lack of not praying and worshipping, wiring your brain for low levels of achievement will automatically program you in your later years of life to just be an NPC. Because that's the character you chose. You had a choice to select something and someone who can be great, who can look up to Imam Hassan al-Askari, who can look up to Imam al-Jawad and say, look, despite the restrictions, despite the surveillance, despite all the problems they had, this man was controlling an entire population throughout the Muslim lands. Am I even able to control my own self? What habits am I working on to make a part of my life? What habits, spiritually speaking, intellectually speaking, am I ensuring that becomes part of my life? Or am I just living in this wave that is created by an external environment that I do not control? I do not dictate the culture that I live in, so allow it to drown me. Allow it to take me wherever it takes me. 5 years, 10 years later down the track, you look at yourself in the mirror and you cannot recognize yourself. Why? Continuously engaging in a culture that is so far and remote from the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt. If you take it easy, your religion will be taken away from you. That's how simple it is. If Imam Hassan al-Askari can do his responsibility, perform his obligation in the eyes of Allah as the Imam, with all that pressure, with all that difficulty, surely the responsibilities that you have are much smaller. They are not at the scale of Imam Hassan al-Askari, but you will be questioned for them. In this dunya, you will face the consequences. I will face the consequences if I waste my youth, and so will you. And it might be too late at that point to do a 180. Why? Because the programming has been done. The character has been chosen. The game has started, and you just have to go forward until the character dies. And guess what? You're not going to be spawned again. That's the end of it. That's a sad, sad reality. That someone at the age of 30, 35, 40 would then have to live with. A series of habits that he has no control over. A series of life choices that he can no longer control. They are controlling him. And this, my brothers and sisters, as lovely as this part of the world is, if you take it easy, this part of the world, this culture here, the way of life here is a monster. It can take you to places you do not want to be. But slowly, step by step, reel by reel, hour by hour, spent on something that does not benefit you, yes, after a few years, you'll be a different being. You'll be something that you could not recognize. And it will be difficult for us to maybe claim to be the Shia at that point. It will be difficult for us to even claim to be lovers of the Ahlul Bayt at that point. And do not wait for your parents. I'm even talking about these 9-year-olds here, 10-year-olds here. I'm talking to you as well. Do not wait for your parents. Take charge of your own growth. On social media, all you hear is people shouting and blaring the same slogan. Start early, hustle. Hustle for what? For money, yeah? Okay. Hustle for yourself. How is it that a 16-year-old now is encouraged a 15-year-old to start a side business, a side hustle, but is not encouraged to start a hustle to work on himself spiritually, religiously, on his character? That's the society you live in. You don't wait for your parents to worry about the kind of money you'll raise. You don't, right? You start thinking about it. You don't wait for your parents for the kind of life you want to live when it comes to marriage, the house, the area, the job. How is it when it comes to the character habits you want to have? You're waiting for people to change you? And if you're waiting around, guess who's changing you? Big Brother, with all the tentacles that he has drawn around your lives. Every commemoration of every Imam is an opportunity to connect to that Imam. So if we want to connect tonight to Imam Hassan al-Askari alayhi salam, let that be the lesson we take. Let that be the lesson I take. I go home and say, look, a young Imam, a successful Imam, a man that was revered by everyone. I want to be 10% of that. I want to be 5% of that. Or let's put it better. I want to be 100% of what I can be. And I'll ask the Imams, I'll do tawassul to the Imams to help me with that. And I'll ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help me along the way. This is the father of the Imam of our time. And by him, with him, the occultation started. And we are living in difficult times, in sad times. So our duty is increased. So I will use the end as an opportunity to both connect to the father and to the son by reciting Dua Faraj. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. اللهم كل وليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل الساعة، وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا، تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.